Once upon a time, in a quiet valley surrounded by tall pine trees, there lived two sisters named Marina and Lila. They shared a small wooden cottage with their father, old Tomas, who owned a tiny fruit shop in the nearby village. Marina was gentle and hardworking, always helping her father and tending to their home. Lila, on the other hand, loved to wander by the river, admiring her reflection and dreaming of an easy, fancy life. "I'm prettier than Marina," she often whispered to herself, brushing her long brown hair in the water's reflection. Every morning, Marina swept the floor, cooked breakfast, and helped her father arrange baskets of oranges and apples for sale. Lila never helped. Instead, she danced around the garden or played with the wildflowers. "Lila, could you please carry this basket?" Marina would ask kindly. "Oh, I can't," Lila replied, yawning. "It will spoil my dress." Old Tomas would sigh but never scold her. "She will learn someday," he murmured. Marina just smiled and continued her work. One day, old Tomas called his daughters together. "My children," he said softly, "I must travel far to trade our fruits in another village. I may be gone for a long time." Marina's eyes filled with tears. "Please, father, be careful." Lila, however, smiled secretly. "Now I can sit by the river all day," she thought. The next morning, Tomas left with his donkey and cart, waving goodbye as the sisters stood at the gate. When their father was gone, Marina worked even harder. She cleaned, cooked, and looked after the small garden. "I'll make father proud," she said. But Lila became even lazier. She spilled water on the floor, dirted the carpets, and poured cold water into the soup Marina cooked. "Lila, why is the soup cold again?" Marina cried. "Maybe the wind did it," Lila said, laughing. "Or maybe the pots don't like your cooking." Marina frowned but said nothing. She only whispered, "Someday, kindness will speak for itself." One sunny afternoon, Lila went walking in the forest. The air was sweet with wild berries and pine needles. She picked a few unripe strawberries and tossed them into the river for fun. Just then, an old woman appeared from behind a tree. Her hair was silver, and she leaned on a crooked cane. "Good day, dear girl," the old woman said kindly. "I am hungry. Could you spare me some fruit?" Lila smirked and handed her the sour strawberries. "Here, old one. The best in the forest," she said mockingly. The old woman tasted one and grimaced. Her stomach began to ache. "Oh dear," she whispered weakly. But Lila just giggled and walked away. "Serves you right for asking strangers for food," she muttered. Soon after, the old woman sat by a tree, pale and trembling. That same evening, Marina entered the forest with a basket to gather herbs for dinner. She noticed the old woman lying weakly by the path. "Oh no! Are you all right?" she cried, kneeling beside her. Marina quickly helped the woman stand. "You must come home with me," she said. "You need rest." Together they walked back to the cottage. When Lila saw them, she frowned. "Why did you bring this smelly woman home?" she asked. "Because she's sick, Lila. We must care for her." Marina boiled water, made herbal tea, and prepared hot soup. The old woman smiled faintly. "You're a kind girl," she whispered. But when Marina turned her back, Lila poured out the soup and added dirt into the tea. "Lila!" Marina shouted when she saw the muddy tea. "Did you do this?" "No," Lila lied. "The old woman must have dropped it." Marina sighed and cleaned up again. For days, she cared for the old woman, bringing her clean blankets and warm meals. Slowly, the woman began to recover. Before leaving, she took Marina's hand and said softly, "If you ever fall sick, eat these blueberries. They hold healing magic." Marina smiled and thanked her. "You're very kind, grandmother." The old woman nodded and disappeared into the forest. Weeks passed. Marina worked from dawn till dusk. The endless chores finally made her ill. One morning, she couldn't even lift her head. "Lila," she whispered weakly, "please bring me the blueberries Grandmother Wren gave me." But Lila had already eaten them herself the day before. "Blueberries. I don't know where they are," she said carelessly. Maybe the birds ate them. Marina sighed and closed her eyes, too weak to speak. That evening, Lila sat by the river, brushing her long hair and admiring herself. "I'm the most beautiful girl in the valley," she said proudly. Suddenly, the old woman appeared again, standing on the riverbank. "Hello, little girl," she said in her gentle voice. "Where is your sister?" Lila rolled her eyes. "Oh, she's fine. She went to pick fruits. Why do you care?" The old woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she shook her head sadly and vanished. The old woman went straight to the cottage. When she entered, she saw Marina lying pale and weak on the bed. "Oh, my dear child," she whispered tearfully. "You saved me, and I will save you." As the woman wept, her wrinkled face began to glow. A bright light filled the room. Lila, peeking from the window, gasped in shock. The old woman was turning into a beautiful fairy. Lila rushed inside, her eyes wide. "A fairy! You're a real fairy," she cried. "Please give me a gift too. I want the most beautiful hair in the world." The fairy looked at her calmly. "Lila," she said, "I came to you once before, disguised as an old woman. I gave you a chance to show kindness, but your heart was full of pride and cruelty." Lila laughed nervously. "That's not true. I was only joking." But the fairy lifted her wand. "Since you love your beauty so much," said the fairy, "let it become what you truly are inside." Terrified, Lila ran to the river to look at her reflection. Her hair twisted like snakes of leaves, and flies buzzed around her. "I'm hideous, her. Help! Somebody help me!" she screamed, but no one came. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she waved her wand once. Lila screamed as her long shiny hair turned into thick green ivy that crawled down her back. "No! What have you done to me?" she cried. The ivy wrapped around her legs, pulling her toward the ground. "Please take it back. I'll change." But the fairy only said, "You will learn." "Thought of Marina lying sick at home," she cried. "I can't even touch my hair, it's alive." The ivy strands tangled in the grass, trapping. Meanwhile, the fairy returned to Marina's bedside. She gently placed a single blueberry on the girl's lips. "Eat, child," she whispered. The fruit melted in Marina's mouth like honey. A soft light surrounded her, and color returned to her face. Her eyes fluttered open. "Fairy," she whispered. "Yes, my dear. You are well now," the fairy said, smiling warmly. When Marina sat up, she gasped. Their old cottage was gone. In its place stood a shining palace made of gold and crystal. "This is my gift to you," said the fairy, "for your kindness and heart of gold." Marina's eyes widened. "It's beautiful, but what about Lila?" The fairy's face grew solemn. "She will remain by the river, trapped by her own vanity." Marina stood quietly, then said, "Please, fairy, I don't want this palace if my sister cannot be happy. What is a home without love? Bring her back and give us our cottage again. That is my only wish." The fairy looked surprised, and then smiled with tears in her eyes. "You are truly good, Marina. Few hearts are so pure." With a wave of her wand, the golden palace shimmered and vanished, turning back into their small, cozy cottage. The fairy then appeared beside the river, where Lila still struggled against the ivy. "Your sister's love has saved you," the fairy said softly. She touched Lila's hair, and the ivy disappeared, turning back into her silky brown locks. Lila burst into tears and ran to Marina, hugging her tightly. "I'm so sorry, Marina," she sobbed. "I was cruel and foolish. Please forgive me." Marina smiled gently. "You're my sister. Of course I forgive you." The fairy watched them, her eyes glowing softly. "Remember, children," she said, "true beauty lives in the heart." From that day on, the sisters lived happily together. Lila helped Marina with the housework and cared for the garden with joy. They often visited the river, not to admire beauty, but to reflect on kindness. And though the fairy never returned, her magic remained in their hearts. For they had both learned that happiness grows when it is shared, and kindness always finds its way back.